The year is 1447 BC. The place is Lower Egypt. The pyramids at this point are over 500 years old. The ruling monarch is the tyrannical Amenhotep II, the head of a wealthy absolute theocracy. The Hebrews are regarded by the Egyptians as the underclass, and they occupy all the menial jobs that the Egyptians do not want to do. They are the builders, the cleaners, the domestic servants, the launderers, the nannies, the skilled tradesmen, and agricultural workers. This was anything but a comfortable life. Their work was 7 days per week and unending. Their Egyptian overlords would gladly remind their Hebrew servant class who were the ones in charge. It served their interests well, as by this point the Hebrews outnumbered the Egyptians. Therefore, in order to enforce Egyptian superiority, beatings and cruelty were not uncommon. Whilst absolutely vital to the economy, they were servile to the Egyptians, and their god Ye-ho-veh was mocked and despised. In a culture of polytheism, the worship of many gods, the concept of the Hebrews worshipping only one god was astonishing, even laughable, and they were considered absurdly god-poor. Amenhotep, however, was regarded as nothing less than the physical embodiment and reincarnation of Ra, the sun god. The people bow before Pharaoh as the chief of thousands of gods and goddesses, and he gladly receives their worship. The supernatural world was very real, and Amenhotep would regularly experience manifestations of the spiritual during his worship. He had official court-sanctioned sorcerers who could produce astonishing displays of black magic. His lifestyle was utterly indulgent. Inhabiting Pharaoh's sumptuous and opulent palace is the great royal wife and a large number of lesser wives or concubines. Feasting on the most delicate of foods, dressed in the finest of clothing, Pharaoh instantly receives every whim of desire, sparing himself nothing. Surrounded by sycophantic chiefs, stewards, and heads of departments, they hang on his every word. There is no lower chamber within the Egyptian government acting as a check and balance so as to scrutinize, alter, or reject his decrees. Whatever Pharaoh says is law. He is answerable to no one, and therefore evil can run amok. One day, on a day just like any other, two simply dressed men in their 80s walk boldly into Pharaoh's court. The quiet one, Moses, holds a shepherd's staff in his hand, whilst the other one confidently does all of the talking. They show no deference to Pharaoh, and Aaron, appearing aloof to the grandeur of the royal court, gets straight to the point.
The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, "Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness."
And so begins one of the greatest showdowns between God, the Creator, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one that Jews and Christians worship today, versus the power of the God of this world, Satan, the deceiver, embodied in the person of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, head of the Empire of Egypt. But before we get into much fascinating detail, let's back up over 400 years. How did God's people, the Hebrews, get themselves into this predicament? Why was the Pharaoh so stubborn and unyielding against an unrelenting escalation of God's power? Going back further, how did the Israelites end up in Egypt in the first place? Weren't they meant to be living in Israel? They were Hebrews after all. In the book of Genesis, we see that Joseph, the great-grandson of Abraham, was sold by his brothers to an Ishmaelite merchant caravan heading from Gilead to Egypt. After years of favoritism from their father, the hatred of his insanely jealous brothers overflowed into a conspiracy to kill him. Thwarted at the last minute by the eldest brother Reuben, instead, the brothers sold him to the traders and despicably reported him dead to their father, who mourned bitterly. That would have been the end of it, except that not many years later, there was a severe famine covering a large part of the Middle East. Hearing that there was plenty of grain in Egypt, at first, all of Joseph's brothers except one went to Egypt to buy grain. Shortly afterwards, their father Jacob and the last brother went also. The plenty that they had heard about turned out to be an understatement. Egypt was positively overflowing with grain, which was sold at a good profit to anyone in need. So with a severe regional famine, how had Egypt attained so much? What the jealous brothers could not possibly have known is that their once spoilt and arrogant brother, now humbled and refined by his treatment in Egypt, stayed faithful as God protected him and raised him up to be no less than vizier of the most powerful empire in the world, a position similar to what we would call prime minister today, only with considerably more power. Further, God had given him divine warning, 7 years in advance, and the means to thoroughly prepare for it. Diligently, Joseph had set to work building huge storehouses to hold the super-vast quantities of grain, as year after year the crops produced bumper harvest after bumper harvest. It seemed like this astonishing plenty, continuous once-in-a-lifetime harvests, would never stop, until suddenly, on the 8th year, the harvest crashed, and even by the normal standards of the occasional very poor harvest, it was absolutely atrocious. And it went on, year after year. And so Joseph's father Jacob, renamed Israel by God, his 11 brothers, his sisters, with all their families, made the journey to Egypt. The brothers and Joseph reconciled and were treated extremely well. They and their families thrived and stayed in Egypt, growing to be very large in numbers. But has it ever struck you even for a moment how an Egyptian pharaoh, certainly not known for being kindly disposed to non-Egyptians, would allow Joseph, a Hebrew, a worshipper of this one strange god, to have such an astounding level of power? Understanding this will show us some of the lengths to which God went to preparing the groundwork over hundreds of years to preserve his people, thus enabling them to grow and to come into covenant with him, then to receive his commands and to be a light to the nations. This light would not be extinguished over the many, many centuries to follow, culminating in Jesus, the light that shines in the darkness. To this day, he enables those who truly follow him to overcome the fatal attraction of our carnal nature that, no matter how well disguised, always leads to eternal separation from God, which the Bible calls the second death. Before we look at the plagues in detail, which reveal some of the incredible multi-level work that God did, let's roll the clock back a little further one last time to the 15th and 16th dynasties, also known as the Second Intermediate Period, starting around 1650 BC. Enter the Hyksos rulers. Egypt was attacked and routed by Bedouins who were Semites, that is, descendants of Shem, son of Noah, therefore making them distant cousins of Israel. Their motivation was to simply acquire what Egypt had and perceived that it was militarily very weak. So in they marched. The Egyptians called these foreign rulers the Hyksos, Hyk meaning kings, Sos meaning shepherds. They were the shepherd kings. No doubt there was an implied insult, as the Egyptian representation of the highest of the gods was the Apis bull. However, sheep were very low down the list indeed. Compared to other periods of history, we know little about them, but this is common with most cultures of the time, as they would not record periods of defeat or great trauma. What we do know are from records written by the common folk who lived during the era. Even with some inconsistencies, scholars generally agree that for the period shortly before the time of Joseph and for about 100 years afterwards, it was the Semitic Hyksos rulers who were the pharaohs of Egypt. This explains why Moses recorded that Potiphar, who previously bought Joseph as a slave, was an Egyptian. This would be an absurdly obvious detail, were it not for Moses getting across that Potiphar was ethnically Egyptian, not a Semitic Hyksos. But most importantly, Joseph and the Pharaoh were both Semitic. This is why the Pharaoh had little trouble in making Joseph the second most powerful person in the world. He regarded Joseph as kin. Do you think that this would have been even remotely possible if the Pharaoh was Egyptian? This is nothing less than God's intervention, weaving events into a perfect tapestry, despite the vagaries of human will, and in such a subtle way that only whispers of it are seen. Back to the court of Amenhotep II.
The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, "Let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness."
The words reverberated as the palace fell silent. The perplexed court turned as one to Pharaoh for a response. Pharaoh looked back at these messengers of the one true God with disdain and contempt.
Who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go.
Pharaoh cannot understand how he has never heard of this Ye-ho-veh. He is, after all, the head of a pantheon of gods, the living embodiment of the chief Egyptian god. He knows all these gods, so how is it possible that the mighty Amenhotep has never heard of this Ye-ho-veh? He certainly is not going to be bossed around by him. And anyway, because the Hebrews belonged to him, their god was of no relevance. If he existed at all, he must be very weak indeed, as he is only the god of measly slaves. So Pharaoh now demands a sign from the pair. Moses and Aaron were prepared for this, as earlier God had gone through a dry run with the brothers. Aaron throws down his staff on the palace floor, and instantly it becomes a living snake. Pharaoh was rattled. God had not chosen to turn the staff into a snake randomly, out of all the living creatures it could have been. He had something in mind. The cobra was worshipped as a god in Lower Egypt and was a symbol of kingly authority. God was using this staff-turned cobra to speak in a language Pharaoh would understand. Anything impersonating this symbol of authority was not amusing. The intended challenge was received loud and clear. It was now Pharaoh's move, and without wasting a moment, he summons his court magicians. Pharaoh orders them to use their black arts to turn their staffs into snakes. Whilst chanting spells, each one throws down a staff in turn, and they also become snakes. However, God shows who is boss, causing Aaron's snake to eat the magician's snakes. Aaron then bends down, grasping its tail, and it instantly turns back into the staff. Surprisingly, Amenhotep is not moved. His heart was hard, regarding Moses and Aaron as little more than excellent magicians, even if his snakes were eaten by Aaron's. Let's pause for a moment and take stock. Here we see God giving Moses, a mere man, miraculous powers. This was truly an all-time first. God had never done this before. However, there were strict conditions attached. Firstly, each miracle did not originate in the imagination of Moses, but was God's specific will communicated to Moses for the situation at hand. For example, God would not permit Moses to use his staff to create out of thin air a lavish banquet fit for a king. Secondly, the miracles could only be performed by means of God's Holy Spirit, so no miracle, even one of God's will, could be performed by Moses, conjuring or using an incantation. This is absolutely crucial and just as applicable today. Any modern miracle that is outside of these strict parameters is not from God and originates from our adversary, Satan. Pharaoh is angry.
Just who do these two think they are? Just because they can do a magic trick in front of the royal court, they have the gall to demand the release of all the slaves,
said Pharaoh, amazed.
And in the name of their pathetic slave god,
he said contemptuously,
the Hebrews are going to regret the day they sent Moses and Aaron to me, for I am their God.